Hi there. Neil here, the Twisted Light Worker. Today's Independence Day is different than any other Independence Day that we've had for 125 years or more. Today, Independence Day is celebrated worldwide. For those of us who are awake, we realize this is the Independence Day of the whole Earth realm. Yes, the American system of economics and the American system of politics. That is really what's happening. Once again, we're establishing on the Earth realm the American system. And that is unfortunately not understood by very many people. And the reason being is we don't do a lot of things that we should do. Generally, we don't question our beliefs. When one stops thinking, stops questioning, especially their own beliefs, that's when expansion stops. So don't stop questioning your beliefs, and don't stop thinking, growing, and learning. The new world will be so different as we tap into that spark of the divine more and more and more. We realize deeper and deeper we create ourselves and our reality. So let's just move forward and create. See, we are the ones that we are waiting for. And Independence Day, 250 years of independence, celebrated by the United States, the American vision, the American system of economics, the American system of political control, or pardon me, not even control, the American system of politics. That is what we're celebrating. And Independence Day means each and every one of us is independent as human beings. We are all endowed with the spirit of the divine inside, and we were all creators. And to have that kind of freedom, that is the celebration of Independence Day this year. 2026, a new beginning of the whole Earth realm begins. I'm going to insert here a talk from 𝓱𝓮𝓻𝓮 𝓸𝓭𝓾. She has it really nailed down. She's been on this path of reawakening the American system of economics for 50 years, ever since the assassination of JFK and maybe even before. That's when she started her learning. And she puts together an incredible talk to let everybody know exactly what this American Independence Day 2026 is all about. Here's Susan.
Today, Americans are celebrating the 250th anniversary of our Declaration of Political Independence from the British Empire. But there's another cause for celebration, and President Trump heralded the reason for that 9 years ago.
In explaining his American system, Clay argued that the sole object of the tariff is to tax the produce, and remember, to tax the produce of foreign industry with the view of promoting American industry. For too long, our government has abandoned the American system.
More than anything else, that statement made the president a marked man, because in saying the words, the American system, Donald Trump put the modern-day British Empire on notice that the United States was about to reclaim the economic independence that had been ripped away from us 125 years ago. Now, the president was stopped from actually doing it in his first term, but he's doing it now, and it is what makes this Independence Day more profound than you might know. I'm 𝓱𝓮𝓻𝓮 𝓸𝓭𝓾. I've fought to restore the American system for the better part of my life. And on this 250th anniversary of our independence, I want to give you the one principle that makes sense of this moment. The principle that reveals Donald Trump's work as a genuine revolution. And it shows us fulfilling the promise our founders wrote in the Declaration itself. Now, if you're watching this for the first time, please hit those like, share, and subscribe buttons. And then stick with me as I discuss these three things. First, how the British stole our economic heritage 125 years ago. Second, what the opening words of the Declaration of Independence have to do with economics. And third, why our founding fathers enjoined us to pursue happiness and not property. But let's start with why the knowledge of America's own unique economic system has been written out of our history. In 1901, 125 years ago, exactly halfway between 1776 and today, President William McKinley was assassinated. Now, you've heard President Trump talk about McKinley's tariffs and how they made the nation so prosperous that a commission had to be set up to figure out how to spend the extra revenues. McKinley was the last president who openly embraced and acted on the American system. He continued Alexander Hamilton's policies of tariffs, protecting American industry, and fostering internal improvements to develop the nation. And he was also in the tradition of Abraham Lincoln, who was a champion of producers, manufacturers, and especially the working class. McKinley's assassination in 1901 marked a turning point, because it wasn't just McKinley who was eliminated. The knowledge of the American system itself and the fact that its mortal enemy was the British system was erased and replaced by debates over big government or little government or Keynes versus Friedman. So let's go back for a moment to Abraham Lincoln's economic advisor and one of the champions of the American system, Henry Carey. In a work called The Harmony of Interests, Carey said that there are two systems before the world. One looks to pauperism, ignorance, depopulation, and barbarism. The other to increasing wealth, comfort, intelligence, combination of action, and civilization. One looks toward universal war, the other to universal peace. One is the English system, the other we may be proud to call the American system. Now, let Carey's words sink in. One system produces wealth, intelligence, and civilization. The other produces pauperism, ignorance, and war. That is not ancient history. Pauperism, depopulation, and war describe the policies of today's World Economic Forum. But our side of the fight, and the American economic principles which will allow us to prevail, have been suppressed for 125 years. Now, Carey wrote The Harmony of Interests in 1851. At that time, Karl Marx was living in poverty and obscurity in London. It was only later that his London sponsors spread the idea that the essential conflict was between communism and capitalism. Losing the knowledge of the American system is key to understanding the last 125 years of wars and economic downturns. Because the British didn't just assassinate McKinley, they assassinated the very idea of the American system, because they knew if our nation or other nations pursued those principles, they would become strong, prosperous, and peaceful, and the empire would be left in the dust. So they stripped us of the principles and gave us sterile or destructive ideas like free trade and laissez-faire, and gave us imperial institutions like the Federal Reserve. And then they told us that's how economies work. Now, if you want to dive more deeply into this fight and see how it shapes today's political battles, you can subscribe to Promethean Action's free newsletter. The link is in the description. Because you're going to very quickly learn that what you were told were the laws of economics were just the advertising slogans for the British imperial system. So let's go to the very opening of the Declaration of Independence, where our founders invoked the laws of nature and nature's God. They knew their actions were accountable to universal principles, which is why we emerged as a republic and not a democracy. Now, during this 250th year of celebration, there has been a lot of reflection on how those principles relate to our political and cultural identities. But the profound impact of those principles on our economic identity is only now coming back into view. But one man, writing from a jail cell on July 4th, 1989, saw it clearly. Lyndon LaRouche, who was targeted and jailed by the same forces who have attacked Donald Trump, wrote the following. He said, "A state is defined by two kinds of relationships. On the one side, A state is the government acting in direct relationship to the individual person and each particular constituency in society, and in similar qualities of relationship to foreign states. Now, that's the part most people think about. How does the government relate to you or your identified constituents, or how does it relate to another country in terms of foreign policy? But LaRouche identified a second function, and this is the part that the British system wants you to forget entirely. At the same time, on the other side, a state is shaping the entire nation's relationship to the physical universe. Now, go back to those terms, the laws of nature and nature's God. That is what the American system is. It's a form of economics that recognizes there are universal principles, and for a nation to continue and to prosper, it must order its policies in keeping with those principles. And that means a nation must successfully act on the physical universe. And that means it must produce, it must manufacture, and it must invent and discover. But gradually, over the past 125 years, since the assassination of McKinley, that American idea has been taken away from us, and it was replaced by many different versions of British philosophical liberalism in the form of free trade, consumerism, environmentalism, and sterile debates about big versus little government. All of those ideologies rest on the idea that money is the measure of an economy. But now, in the months leading up to our 250th anniversary celebration, members of Donald Trump's administration have revived the American system idea. Back in January, U.S. Trade Ambassador Jameson Greer gave a speech entitled "The Hamiltonian Economic System That Too Many Have Forgotten." Then in June, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent restored an essential principle of the American system, that is, the primacy of production over mere consumption.
Beneath every one of those mistakes lay a more basic failure in our philosophy. In reducing economics to consumption, we forgot production. We measured abundance at the checkout counter rather than at the factory gate. We talked about GDP, but not enough about its composition. And we prized low-cost inputs without first asking whether a nation can remain sovereign when it loses command over the things that matter most. For manufacturing is more than output on a balance sheet, it is a reservoir of practical capability. Engineers and welders, tool and die makers, and logistic networks, plant managers and workers who know how to solve problems on the factory floor.
In those comments, Bessent hit at the essential difference between a nation of consumers at the mercy of a global market ruled by the British system, and a nation of producers who produce what they need with their minds and with their manufacturing. Then Vice President J.D. Vance took it a step deeper in an extraordinary interview with Michael Knowles just this week. Knowles first cited Pope Leo XIII's 1891 encyclical Rerum Novarum, which forcefully rejected communism, but also rejected, without using the words I'm about to use, the British system. Or, as Knowles put it, the laissez-faire capitalists who think we need to send kids into coal mines. And then he asked Vance to elaborate on the total restructuring of economic policy that has taken place under President Trump.
But the president has already completely reoriented the conversation towards what you might call an American developmentalist approach. American economic policy on the right is now much more Alexander Hamilton than it is Milton Friedman. I do think fundamentally that Hamiltonian tradition is going to be what we see on the American right and will dominate American conservative economic thinking for the future. Yeah, which is not laissez-faire. It's actually much more about, building the kind of tools, building the kind of infrastructure that allow human beings to flourish. Yeah. That allow national and native industries to flourish at the expense of a hyper-globalized economy. And I think those are the basic principles that are going to carry us into the future. But to me, it's fundamentally about the dignity of the human person. The economy is a tool to service the dignity of the human person.
Listen again to what the vice president just said. The economy is a tool to service the dignity of the human person, not to service property, not to service money. And that brings us back to the Declaration of Independence and the most quiet, radical decision our founders ever made. I remember way back when I was in college, I spent hours in the library reading books about the intellectual foundations of the American Revolution and constantly being directed back to John Locke. Even then, long before I discovered the real philosophical wellsprings of our founding, something kept telling me that our great nation could not have emerged from the cynical view of mankind expressed by Locke. And without knowing why, I was right. It turns out that the Constitution, which John Locke wrote for the South Carolina colony, read life, liberty, and property. But that is not what Thomas Jefferson, guided by the genius of Benjamin Franklin, wrote. Our Declaration of Independence reads, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." That is not a poetic flourish. It was a philosophical declaration of war, because behind those two different phrases are two different ideas of what a human being is. In Locke's world and in the world of Thomas Hobbes and Adam Smith and Jeremy Bentham, man is no better than an animal, driven by original instincts or by the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain, translated into my money, my profit, my property. But in the tradition our founders drew from, the tradition of Gottfried Leibniz and of Benjamin Franklin, man is in the image of the Creator, a mind capable of discovering the laws of nature and nature's God and acting on that. The pursuit of happiness is not the pursuit of things. It is the pursuit of that highest human activity, to discover, to create, and to leave for our posterity a world more developed than we found it. A nation founded on happiness is a nation that measures itself not by what it owns, but by what it can create. Obviously, our founders did not reject private property or private ownership, but they recognized that for a society to succeed, the higher principles of universal law had to frame a nation's policies. And that is exactly what LaRouche was describing from that jail cell, a state shaping the entire nation's relationship to the physical universe. That's what Besant meant when he said we have to measure abundance at the factory gate, not just the checkout counter. And that's exactly what Vice President Vance meant when he said the economy exists to let human beings flourish. The American system is not only an economic policy. It is a recognition that a nation lives or dies by its command over the physical universe, and that its purpose is the creative development of its people. That's what we are really celebrating today. Not only that we broke free of a king in 1776, but that in 2026, after 125 years, we are reclaiming what that freedom was for. So let's put this together. In 1776, we declared that government exists to secure the conditions for human happiness. In 1901, that project was hijacked, and now it is being reclaimed. But let's take one more long step into the past and locate just how profound our nation's founding was. Almost 4 centuries before the birth of Christ, Aeschylus, a Greek poet, wrote the play Prometheus Bound. He used the ancient myth of Prometheus, stealing fire from the gods to give to mankind, to illuminate the same fight we've been talking about. And you can see in the image of Zeus, who punished Prometheus for his gift to mankind, a metaphor for the elites and the oligarchs who want to keep mankind ignorant and barbaric and depopulated, as Henry Carey later said. And you can see in Prometheus the metaphor for what mankind is, capable of using fire to advance our power over nature, and more importantly, capable of using the fire of a creative mind to improve our relationship to the physical universe. That Promethean metaphor carried into the American Revolution. Benjamin Franklin was hailed as the American Prometheus, the scientific genius who snatched lightning from the sky, and who later declared that we had been given a republic if we can keep it. For 125 years, we lost the economic knowledge of how to keep it. Donald Trump and his team have rediscovered it, and are using it to restore our economic sovereignty. If you want to be part of that revival, go to Promethean Action and support us in every way that you can. This has been a special holiday update. Thank you for watching, and happy 250th birthday, America.
Please take a moment and subscribe to our free newsletter at 𝓯𝓷𝓽𝓻𝓮.
You see what I mean? Susan has that nailed down perfectly. There's no way I could say it with such finesse and understanding as she has, because she, unlike most of us, have not been studying that particular line of thought for very long. So many people are waiting for 𝓘𝓷𝓽𝓻𝓸𝓭𝓾. What do you think this is happening? The American system of economics being implemented worldwide. That is 𝓘𝓷𝓽𝓻𝓸𝓭. Are you catching on to seeing the big picture yet? I sure do hope so. I encourage you to watch this video on the 4 cornerstones of the cabal. I uploaded it maybe a month or so back, and every bit of information in that video is very pertinent to right today. I'll leave the link in the description. So also watch this video on the Roman Circus 2026. That takes another step further. Adding those 2 videos to Susan's talk should bring you up to snuff to what's really going on. People are impatient for no reason whatsoever. They're impatient because they have not researched. They haven't got a 60,000-foot view of what's really going on. And this video, combined with those 2 videos that I just mentioned, that should bring you up to snuff so that you can actually see what's going on. You see, I've been adding this little graphic on the ends of my videos now for 6 years. 2030 will be our agenda, and I call it tribalism because we will learn to thrive and be happy. Individual nation states, each empowering the people of that nation to make the most of themselves. As Susan said in her talk, it's all about individual freedom to create, and the world, governments, are there to make sure that we can become the creators that we are meant to be. We can become the creators that we are meant to be. So what do you want to create? What do you want to roll your sleeves up to do with the rest of your life? And if you're young, oh, I love the young. They've got the vitality of the youth that I wish I still had. But hopefully I can share a little bit of wisdom and help them realize just how much power they have on the inside. On the inside, where that spark of divine is right in the DNA, and the DNA strands are found in every single cell of your body. There's 70 to 100 trillion cells in your body, and every one of them is imbued with that strand of DNA. And the telomeres on the end of the strand of DNA is our antennas that are linked to our connection to that spark of divine within, so that we are all co-creators with God. We can't help it because God's inside. And if we tap into it, that is when we activate the power of love, power of sound mind, power that we are endowed with. God hath not given the spirit of fear, but of love and of power and sound mind. And it's up to us to build a pathway and access those 3 gifts and apply them to our lives. And now you see this celebration of 250-year independence from the Roman Empire, from the British control over the whole earth realm, begins today. This is the Independence Day of the whole earth realm. And with that, I'm going to leave you with a wish from the bottom of my heart, from that spark of the divine that's in every single cell of my body, just like you. I wish you and yours peace profound.